The story starts with a man named Ray Cooper, who's in search in the cure for Amanda's cancer. His wife, along with his daughter Rachel, they committed their time and effort on the investment of the cure named Inferment. However, the drug is pulled off from the market as its competitive brand Bioprime, the makers of the Inferment, bribes the manufacturers to avoid cost competition and so halted the production of the cure, thus resulting in Amanda to die on her illness. And then the start of the vengeance story. The only thing that relates in our previous lesson is the plot twist of the story, in which Rachel, the daughter of Amanda and Ray, have developed dissociative identity disorder, making the story more shocking to everyone. This can be proven during the last part of the movie, showing that his father is already died 2 years ago in the hands of Santos, and the vengeance on which the audience thought they've made is just a bluff of her extracting her own desire of vengeance, simultaneously simulating her own identity and her father's. Remembering the time they've lost Amanda and from illness, with her father's death, her mental fortitude can keep up with this, resulting of her having a post-traumatic syndrome or PTSD. Several years have passed and her condition worsened to the point of her filling up the gap on her heart. She tried to emulate her own father's ego and mindset. That can be shown how the vengeance plan started. Then again, dissociative identity disorder is a type of multiple personality behavioral disorder in which characterized by switching to alternative identities. It usually develops as a way to cope up with trauma, and which can be related on Rachel's coping mechanism on her familial losses. It also can cause delusions, anxiety, and depression tendencies. It may shown how she mimics her father, how she behaves and recreates her own memories to dampen her unbearable emotions that reduce conscious awareness of the traumatic event. This disorder affects the limbic system of the brain, where the process of regulating memories and emotions are located. It also has a greater resemblance to DPTSD, or dissociative subtype of post-traumatic stress disorder, in which also a type of mental disorder that results from experiencing a distressing event on the patient. The only difference between them is that the neurobiological responses are significantly different depending on whether the ID patients were in a hyper-aroused traumatic identity state with voluntary access to traumatic memories or in the normal dissociative identity state, characterized by dissociative amnesia, high neurobiological activities from amygdala, and which associated with the process of emotion, and insula, where it associated with self-awareness, interception, and pain processing and addiction, along with activity in psychogyrus, parietal cortex, and parahippocampus can also be observed when exposed to a trauma script versus neutral script, while being in their hyper-aroused traumatic identity state than in their neutral hypo-aroused identity state. Rachel's hippocampus is also affected from this illness as it deals with creation and storage of memories. In addition, patients diagnosed with this kind of illness have relatively smaller amygdala and hippocampus than with the normal people. People with this kind of disorder, such as Rachel, suggest to undergo psychotherapy, which involves a series of counseling with the therapist to help them process and understand the traumatic events from the past, which help them in turn understand why they dissociate. Although in the case of Rachel, it may be still possible to cure her mental condition, but the severity of it, as it did not get treated immediately, have increased significantly. However, in the end, where Rachel boarded the flight and left the country, she started to recover from the idea that she now will start anew, as she previously mentioned, from that her memories from her parents in the past are fading away, memories of the time of her being once a sweet girl.
I will make video essay of the movie Sweet Girl. It's about a man seeking vengeance for his wife's cancer death after Bioframe Pharmaceutical pulls Spyro from the market. Spyro is a highly effective genetic version of Infermab that has the potential to cure cancer. Ray vows to exact justice on those responsible for his wife's death while protecting the only family he has left. His daughter Rachel continued the revenge. The death of parents is a highly stressful life event. Several studies have found that affected children have an increased risk of mental illness and psychosocial problems. The effects of trauma on the brain impact three areas of the brain that are impacted the most are the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex. These areas are all play a part in regulating emotions and responding to fear. When we go through trauma, our brains don't function like they normally do. When you're reminded of traumatic experience, your amygdala, emotional and survival center goes into overdrive, acting just you're experiencing the trauma for the first time. Your prefrontal cortex also becomes suppressed, so you're less capable of controlling your fear. You're stuck in purely reactive state. Meanwhile, trauma also leads to reduced activity in the hippocampus. One of those functions is to distinguish between past and present. In other words, your brain can tell the difference between the actual traumatic event and the memory of it. It perceives the things that trigger memories of traumatic events as a threats from themselves.
The movie titled Sweet Girl is a story about revenge. It's about a man trying to get revenge for his wife's death from cancer at the hands of a greedy and indifferent pharmaceutical company while his daughter is pulled along by the currents of his rage. The mega plot twist of the story turns out that Ray was actually dead. Ray died from his wounds at the subway. The stab wound he suffered early in the movie was fatal. And what the movie was showing all along was Rachel's revenge quest. Rachel Cooper has unresolved mental issues. She suffered from PTSD and dissociative identity disorder. Rachel devoted herself to finishing his quest for revenge, thinking and believing Ray Cooper, her father, was still with her and was responsible for all the actions that happened, causing a great and devastating chaos. But all along it was her, Rachel, responsibility. The ending of the story shows that Rachel got her vengeance by killing Santos and forcing Morgan to admit to her ties to Bioprime. Rachel boards a plane for an unknown destination after sending a tape of Morgan's confessions to Baker, having brought her parents' killers to justice. What Rachel suffered and experienced in the movie is called dissociative identity disorder. It is a mental disorder that involves experiencing a disconnection and lack of continuity between thoughts, memories, surroundings, actions, and identity. The symptoms of the mental disorder are similar to what Rachel have experienced in the movie. Symptoms are consisted of memory loss or amnesia of certain time periods, events, people, and personal information, a sense of being detached from yourself and your emotions, a blurred sense of identity, feeling disconnected from yourself and the world around you, feeling uncertain about who you are. Dissociative identity disorder is associated with relatively greater volume reductions in the amygdala than in the hippocampus part of our brain.
The timeline of Sweet Girl flows back in time to show what happened in the past events. Rachel developed dissociative identity disorder, or also known as DID, due to trauma in the event where his father Ray and the journalist Bennett had an accident in the subway. Rachel got unconscious when the event occurred. In the event, Rachel saw how Bennett got stabbed by a hitman. Dissociative identity disorder is a mental health condition. Someone with DID has multiple, distinct personalities. The various identities control a person's behavior at different times. The condition can cause memory loss, delusions, or depression. DID is usually caused by past trauma. DID is usually the result of sexual or physical abuse during childhood. Sometimes it develops in response to a natural disaster or other traumatic events like combat. The disorder is a way for someone to distance or detach themselves from trauma. There are two types of DID. depersonalization, and derealization. Depersonalization is where you have the feeling of being outside yourself and observing your actions, feelings, or thoughts from a distance. And the realization is where you feel the world around is unreal. Rachel's DID occurred because of the conflict that happened in the subway. There are major divisions of the brain, which are the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Forebrain is the closest subject that I can relate to the movie. Forebrain is the largest part of the brain, and it is divided into three main parts: the cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The forebrain is responsible for a variety of functions, including receiving and processing sensory information, thinking, perceiving, producing and understanding language, and controlling motor function. The two major divisions of brain, or the forebrain, are the diencephalon and the telencephalon. When the forebrain is damaged, it causes headaches, confusion, memory problems, and nausea. In a moderate brain injury, symptoms can last longer and be more pronounced. A traumatic brain injury interferes with the way the brain normally works. When nerve cells in the brain are damaged, they can no longer send information to each other in the normal way. This causes changes in the person's behavior and abilities. So basically, Rachel suffered from PTSD and DID because of the side effects of the damaged forebrain. It changes the way she thinks and the way she interacts.
The movie Sweet Girl can be related to our topic through one of the characters, which is Rachel. Rachel is the daughter of Ray, who vows to get revenge to Bioprime. He blamed Bioprime for the death of his wife. Now, let's get back to Rachel and how is she related to our topic. Well, it is because Rachel developed a dissociative identity disorder, or most commonly known as multiple personality disorder. It is a disorder characterized by switching to alternate identities. This was shown in the show when the plot twist of Rachel doing all the revenge and action that have happened in the film instead of Ray was revealed. The cause of this might be all the traumatic events that Rachel went through. There was also a scene where Rachel bumped her head and got a head injury to the point that she passed out. This injury might have damaged her limbic system that causes her personality and behavior to completely change. The limbic system is a part of our brain involved in our behavioral and emotional responses. This might be able to explain the complete change of her personality. Her personality became more aggressive after that head injury. In dissociative identity disorder, since this is a disorder that led the patient to switch identity with alters means that the amygdala and hippocampus is greatly affected. The amygdala is part of the limbic system that is responsible for processing emotions, from positive to negative emotion such as fear and anxiety. The hippocampus, which is also a part of the limbic system, is a complex brain structure embedded deep into the temporal lobe. It has a major role to our brain because the hippocampus is responsible for our brain's ability to learn and store memory. Now, with all the traumatic event that Rachel went through, plus the head injury that she received in the subway, that might have damaged her limbic system or a part of it, is what might have caused her to have a dissociative identity disorder.
The story starts about a husband who his wife got cancer, and with his daughter named Rachel. Ray commit his time and effort to make sure his wife, Amanda, to be cured. The family got hope when they received a news from their doctor that a company have a cure for a cancer that called Sparrow, and that company named Bioprime. However, they got a sudden news from Dr. Wu. that the Bioprime pulled off their production of the medicine that caused Amanda to die from her illness. The death of Amanda made Ray and Rachel devastated, that lead Ray want to punish the people that caused her wife to die. Ray want justice for her wife, so he start his plan to get the justice he want. And it start the vengeance story of Ray. But during the vengeance, Ray got stabbed and Rachel got her head slammed in the ground that caused them to stop their plan in 2 years. After that, after that, Ray continued his revenge together with Rachel. But in the middle of the story, there's an event where it shows a scene that Rachel was the only doing all the revenge because Ray died from the stab he got from the assassin. And Rachel got a dissociative identity disorder and hallucinations from that event where she imitate her father. She think that her father doing all the things and she was beside him. Rachel continue her father mission, which to get justice for his wife. At the end of the story, Rachel get the justice that his father wants. Dissoactive identity disorder is a type of multiple personality behavioral disorder in which characterized by switching to alternative identities. It usually develops as a way to cope with trauma, in which can be related on Rachel's coping mechanism when she lost her both parents. While the hallucinations are where you imagine as something to be real, but in reality, it only exists in your mind. I can relate the disorder to our topic, which it can affect the hippocampus of the limbic system, which is a crucial component of limbic system. And it regulates learning, memory encoding, memory consolidation, and spatial navigation. Studies have shown that it also gets affected in the variety of neurological and psychiatric disorder. It also has a relation to dissociative subtype of post-traumatic disorder. It is a type of mental disorder that result of experiencing a distressing event on the patient. The only difference of the two is its neurobiological response, where it is significantly differed depending on the patient if they in a hyper-aroused traumatic identity states or in their normal dissociative identity states. Thereafter, the high neurobiological activities from amygdala, it is associated in the process of emotion, and insula, where it is associated with self-awareness, interception, pain processing, and addiction. Lastly, the lower activity in cingulate gyrus, parietal cortex, and parahippocampus can also be seen when exposed to a trauma script, while being their hyper-aroused traumatic identity states than in their neutral hyper-aroused identity states.
Therefore, as I watched the film, Rachel and his dad were devastated about her mother's cancer. But the doctors said that there's a cure for it. But unfortunately, Bioframe wouldn't put it on the market, which is why Amanda's death wasn't carried out. Ray calls into a TV talk shows that's interviewing the CEO of Bioframe, and then he plans to kill the CEO of Bioframe, Simon Kelly. And then someone called Ray says that he can help him get revenge. He wanted to meet up with Ray on the train, but Ray didn't know that Rachel was following him. Unfortunately, the man was killed, and Rachel saw how her dad got killed too, leaving her traumatized. So I can relate the film to our topic by featuring what happens to Rachel Cooper when she experiences dissociative identity disorder. It is a mental illness in which a person has two or more distinct personas and hallucinations. It is a sensory encounter in which you perceive something that doesn't actually exist. What is the impact of dissociative identity disorder to the brain? In one trusted source study, scientists evaluated the hippocampus, a part of the brain implicated in memory. In females with DID, researchers discovered that participants' hippocampi were substantially smaller than controls. Also, the hippocampus of those who had more traumatic childhood events was smaller. A later study showed that, in comparison to controls, girls with DID had much thinner and less surface area in some regions of their brains. The insula, anterior cingulate, and parietal cortical sections of the brain had thinner cerebral cortex. The temporal and orbitofrontal cortices brain surface area decrease. These studies demonstrate that trauma can alter the structure of your brain, which may have effects on your memory, behavior, and other cognitive functions. I can relate the hippocampus to the film, which is a crucial component of the limbic system and regulates learning, memory encoding, memory consolidation, and spatial navigation. Then also, the cerebral cortex and the medulla oblongata are linked via the pons, a region of the hindbrain. Moreover, it acts as a hub for communication and coordination between the brain's two hemispheres. And the pons plays an important role in the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. The pons is essential for the proper functioning of the autonomic nervous system. This system regulates the body's automatic functions or things you do without thinking about them, such as breathing and digestion. Including the visual cortex primary function is to process visual information. According to the theory, as visual information is passed along, each subsequent cortical area becomes more specialized than the previous one. Furthermore, the cerebellum is a part of the brain that is involved in almost all physical movement. This part of the brain aids in driving, throwing a ball, and walking across the room. Cerebellum also aids in eye movement and vision. The cerebellar problems are uncommon and usually involve difficulties with movement and coordination. In the scene from the film Sweet Girl 2021, when Rachel witnesses how both her parents died, it leaves her with a trauma. So she develops dissociative identity disorder and hallucinations, which affect her everyday life. It will be hard on Rachel because she thinks that she is also her father.
In the action film Sweet Girl, played by Jason Momoa as Ray Cooper and Isabella Merced as Rachel Cooper, it narrates the story of a father who swears to hold those behind his wife's death accountable while also protecting his daughter. In the movie, Simon Keeley, the CEO of Bioprime, bribed the manufacturer to put off the manufacturing of a medicine that may have saved Ray's wife's life when she was diagnosed with cancer. That's when everything started to go wrong. Ray started to plot his revenge and was furthermore motivated when he was attacked by a hitman named Santos. It happened in the train station where he was about to meet the journalists who have information that can take down the Bioprime CEO. As the film progresses, Ray starts to kill those who he thinks are accountable for his wife's death and those who try to stop him or hunt them. Meanwhile, his daughter Rachel is against all of it, and even called the FBI trying to rationalize why her father is killing. But in a shocking change of events near the film's conclusion, it is revealed that Rachel was the one carrying out the vengeance mission and that Ray had actually passed away due to the fatal wound he received during his encounter with the hitman.
With this unexpected twist of the film, it can be concluded or assumed that Rachel is suffering from PTSD and develops dissociative disorder at the end of the film. Post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD is a disorder that can develop as a result of a shocking, scary, or dangerous events. And it can also be developed due to a sudden or unexpected death of a loved one, which is just like what Rachel Cooper had experienced. Meanwhile, dissociative disorder is a mental disorder that a person can develop as a reaction to a traumatic event which helps to keep difficult memories at bay. With dissociative disorder, a person can forget certain time periods, events, and personal information. They can also experience feeling of uncertainty about their identity and can have multiple distinct identities. In the film, Rachel has forgotten that her dad had died in front of her and is unaware that it is her that is doing all the killing. She even called the FBI about her dad when it was her all along. And at the end of the film, Rachel seems to have been confused about her identity and memory she had created. Rachel had two distinct personalities, one that is similar to her dad and one that is actually her. But what is different about Rachel's situation is that Rachel had visions of her dad talking with her, doing the killings and driving, which is somehow similar to depersonalization. But instead of feeling that she is observing herself, she has the feeling of being with her dad, which is somehow more like a delusion. Due to what happened with Rachel in the movie, it cannot be denied that her brain can be somehow disorganized or overwhelmed, with her body being into survival mode and shutting down rational reasoning to just let the FBI handle things. But what are the neurobiological or physiological effects of PTSD and dissociative disorder in the brain? According to a study, people with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD have their prefrontal brain cortex less active, which means that it is unable to stop the flashbacks of the traumatic event by the hippocampus, which also affects the amygdala as it perceives the memory as a real threat. If a person experiences a traumatic event, the amygdala will store the sights, smells, and sounds associated with this traumatic event, and if one of these stimuli is encountered, the amygdala will trigger the danger signal and will put the body in a protective mode. Additionally, hypervigilance, which is a state of alertness, is counterproductive when a person has PTSD. Since the amygdala is overactive, it interferes with sleep and the ability to feel safe. Meanwhile, the hippocampus, which is essential for memory formation, has a central role in re-experiencing the traumatic event in the form of flashbacks or nightmare. On the other hand, dissociative disorders' neural underpinnings remain unknown, but the neuroimaging studies have suggested that there are prominent functional changes that have been found across the limbic system, particularly when a person with dissociative disorders performs specific tasks that may be affected by the diagnosis. There are also functional abnormalities in the frontal and prefrontal cortices that is connected with certain tasks or states of identity, as well as functional alternations in other cortical areas. In conclusion, after undergoing a traumatic event, the brain can really have different responses that correlates with certain parts of it. While some parts will go hyperactive, some will be less active. Brain is an ever-changing and recovery is possible from traumatic events, but it does not mean that the brain will remain the same.
Hi, my name is William Charles D. Morale. I'm gonna show you into this video what is the connection between our topics, which is the embryological division of the brain, and the movie Sweet Girl. In Sweet Girl, we see how the different regions of the brain control human behavior. The movie follows Ray Cooper, Jason Momoa, as he seeks justice for the death of his wife, who was denied life-saving treatment by a pharmaceutical company. Throughout the movie, we see how Cooper's behavior is controlled by his emotional response to the loss of his wife, which is primarily driven by the limbic system of the brain. The limbic system is a group of structures in the brain that control emotional and motivational behavior. It includes the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. These structures work together to control our responses to emotional stimuli, such as fear or pleasure. In Sweet Girl, we see how Cooper's emotional response to the loss of his wife drives his behavior as he seeks to avenge her death and bring justice to those responsible. His behavior is also influenced by the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making and executive control. The prefrontal cortex is the most evolved region of the brain, responsible for higher-level thinking and decision-making. In Sweet Girl, we see how Cooper's desire for revenge is driven by his emotional response, but his decision to take action is guided by his prefrontal cortex. This interplay between emotional response and decision-making is a key theme in the movie and the highlights of complexity of the human brain. The embryological division of the brain is a fascinating aspect of a human development that plays a critical role in controlling human behavior.